Hey guys, what's going on? Blaine back for another Netflix review, and today I'm going to be talking about The Dig. So as with Penguin Bloom, The Dig is based on a true story and also happens to be based on a book, though unlike the last film, The Dig is based on events that took place way back in 1939, several decades ago, on the eve of the Second World War. The plot is essentially focused on a woman named Edith Pretty, a widow who lives with her son in the rural English countryside, and she suspects these mounds of dirt on her property to be housing some sort of archaeological discovery waiting to be found. She attempts to enlist the services of amateur archaeologist Basil Brown, and despite an initial payment dispute between the two, they eventually agree to partner up as they go on to try and find what's underneath those dirt mounds. I'll be honest up front and say that I didn't really find this film very interesting, at least for the first half hour or so when it started. There's just not really that much that goes on, and it takes a while for the whole point of the story, which is to discover what's under those dirt mounds in order to be, well, discovered. While it's leading up to the discovery, there's just too many things that we don't really care about, at least at the beginning. Like, there's a bunch of family issues, and we don't really know the characters that well. It's one of those slow burn type of stories that takes a while to get going. But when it does, I promise you that it's worth it. Edith Pretty is performed by Carey Mulligan, and I hear that she was actually supposed to be performed by Nicole Kidman in this movie. Apparently, for whatever reason, there was some sort of contractual reason that she had to step out of, and we ended up getting Carey as a result. I don't really know if the role would have been that much different if Nicole Kidman was in this movie as opposed to Carey Mulligan, but I thought for what it was worth, Carey did an excellent job portraying Edith in this movie. You can see that she's not very well right from the beginning whenever the story takes place. She's dealing with a lot of illness issues, specifically with regards to heartburn that she's constantly experiencing, and a lot of that may be due to stress as well, due to having to raise her son by herself. She sort of goes into a monologue in the beginning, and she explains her family history and why she ended up living alone as a widow, and the kind of pain and struggle that she's had to deal with as a result of her husband's passing. And while she's doing this, and throughout the rest of the film, you can see the pain that she's constantly dealing with, both the emotional pain of having to raise a son by herself, as well as the physical pain that she has to endure as a result of the sickness that is slowly overcoming her as the film progresses in its story. Again, I don't know if it would have been different if Nicole was in the role, but Carey did a fantastic job portraying these emotions, as well as just generally portraying a sickly woman that really wants to have her dying wish fulfilled, and she'll do anything in order to see it through to the end. Conversely, Ray Fiennes portrays Basil Brown in this film, and I thought that he was just as fantastic as Carey Mulligan was, if not more. Like with Edith Pretty in this movie, Basil Brown is very much obsessed with finding out with what's exactly underneath those dirt mounds, to the point that he actually turns down potentially higher paying jobs that his former company that he used to be employed with considers to be of more greater historical importance or value or whatever. He turns down those opportunities in order to work on this random field in the middle of nowhere that, for all we know, couldn't have anything at all. I found Basil to be a very interesting contrast to Edith in this movie. While Edith is constantly worried and anxious about the future and what kind of life her son is going to live whenever she inevitably ends up passing away as a result of her illness, Basil is much more optimistic in scope and promises that he'll do his very best to make sure that Edith gets those mounds excavated, and whatever they find under there, she'll be recognized for her efforts. I just like the positive rapport that he had with Edith in this movie. He always does his best to elevate the mood in whatever scene he's in, and he also does a great job being a father figure to Edith's son as well. And like I said, once it gets past that half hour of slowness in the beginning, that's when the movie really starts to take off. We start understanding more about the characters and their backgrounds. There's other characters that are introduced, and we get used to them as well. And then of course, once it gets to the Sutton Hoo, which is the actual site where the whole excavation took place, once that area gets excavated and we find out what's inside, oh man, it was awesome. Just seeing the characters' reactions, the looks on their faces whenever they see just these simple artifacts, like just like one coin or maybe a few rivets here and there. To an ordinary person, they wouldn't really look that valuable. Whenever you understand what the characters are doing for their job and you realize how old and how valuable those artifacts actually are from a historical point of view, I just felt like I was one of the explorers when I was with them when that whole thing was taking place. I felt that there was an overarching theme in this film regarding the passage of time. This idea of Edith being obsessed with death and worrying about what's going to happen in the future, as well as Basil being optimistic about what happens in the future, which makes them an interesting contrast, while also excavating the past items that he's always found in his life as an archaeologist and trying to show those discoveries to the world. He even makes it a point to tell Edith that he doesn't dig in order to find those who died. He digs in order to find life. In this case, trying to find items from previous lives and then showing them to our current life, and how interconnected we are as a species, and that even though our bodies may disappear, our lifestyle and our culture and everything else that follows will go on as we live on too. I just loved how optimistic the vibe was in this movie regarding the passage of time. It even kind of reinforces the scene with a little blurb at the end of the movie, as you would expect in any typical historical drama, dedicating this film to the accomplishments that Edith Pretty and Basil Brown had working on the Sutton Hoo. My only real complaint I have with this film, apart from the British slowness that I talk about in the first half hour, is all the historical inaccuracies that take place. For a film that's supposed to be about history, there's a lot of things in this film that, upon reading up more on it, I found really baffling that they chose to get so many things wrong and a lot of times just make things up completely. There's two characters in the movie named Peggy and Stuart Piggott who are also real-life people in addition to Edith Pretty and Basil Brown. Stuart Piggott is a closeted homosexual, and I never really found it obvious when watching the movie, but when I looked back on it and read up more on the movie and the background behind it, I was like, oh, well, that makes a lot more sense. However, Stuart Piggott was portrayed as much older than Peggy Piggott was in this movie, whereas in real life, there's actually only a 2-year age difference between the two people. Not only that, but they end up going in depth in the relationship between Peggy and Stuart, and they throw in some love interest named Rory Lomax, who I guess was technically Edith's cousin in the movie. I don't know if there actually is a Rory Lomax. As far as I'm aware, when I read up on him, Rory doesn't actually exist. So just the fact that they had to insert a love interest in the movie just for the sake of having one there, it just felt really cliche and dumb, because we already get enough of those in dumb action movies. We don't actually need to see them in a real life based historical drama. I just think that if you're going to make a movie that's based on a historical subject, you have to get the details on the archaeologists right as well. Taking liberties with the historical subject just for the sake of amplifying the drama of whatever film you're making is, in my opinion, really poor taste. Outside of that though, I do recommend watching this movie. I highly recommend anyone who's a fan of British cinema and any sort of historical period piece, you gotta check out this movie. It's right up your alley. It is very slow in the beginning, and it is annoying how many liberties they take with the historical events behind the Sutton Hoo excavation, but as long as you power through it and you can get through the slow burn of the character development, then you'll be in for a good time. Anyways guys, that's gonna wrap up my review of The Dig. Thanks for watching this video, I hope you enjoyed it, and as always, stay tuned for the next part, where next time I review the Spanish action film Below Zero, aka Bajo Cero. Bye bye!